Part 88. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 872. When Su Mei wanted to leave Kandy, several elders put forward many conditions, all of which had only one purpose, which was to worry that their saint would run away and the Wangu sect would become the scattered state it was before. The elders were very worried about having someone from the 10th line serve as the saintess at first, but after discovering that she was not like the people in the 10th line, who only wanted to restore the country and did not think about the Gu clan, their worries immediately just disappeared without a trace. Not only does the saint care about the Gu clan, but she is also very kind-hearted. She has not harmed anyone in the 10,000 Gu forest. After becoming a saint, she has not used Gu pills to control the 10 elders. This is exactly what the 10,000 Gu sect needs. A saint. After the great elder finished speaking, he looked at the other two elders and said, Yinju, Ji Jin, you two, when you go out to Gizhu with the saint this time, you must protect the safety of the saint. When the second elder and the third elder heard this, they immediately bowed and said, yes. Su Mei shook her head and said, the 10 meridians are converging. There are still many things to deal with in the section. How can the great elder handle it alone? Why don't we let the second elder and the third elder stay in the sect, and the fourth elder and the 8th elder go out with me, bar. After the 9th elder disappeared, the 4th elder and the 8th elder became the most senior elders in the sect, fully capable of shouldering the task of protecting the saint. The great elder looked at the 4th elder and the 8th elder, nodded and said, in that case, Xin Yang Xiang, the task of protecting the saint is entrusted to you. Do you have any objections? Su Mei looked at the two of them, smiled sweetly, and said, if the 4th elder and the 8th elder have any objections, you can raise them. It's okay. There is obviously some kind of relationship between the new saint and the scary old guy. The 4th elder and the 8th elder want to hide as far away from them as possible. Of course they have objections to this in their hearts, but they cannot express it in person. They can only. He shook his head and said, we have no objection. It all depends on the holy lady. Su Mei smiled slightly and said, then it's settled. She had just become a saint, and she still had some religious matters to deal with. It would take at least 3 days before she could set off. In the past 3 days, it was not like Tang Ning had done nothing. Now that she has regarded this place as the future residence of her family, she must consider the issue of living here in the future. Gizhu is isolated from the world and rich in natural resources, but daily necessities are very scarce, and all technologies here are very backward. Let alone other things, just talking about medical skills, there is not even a doctor with decent medical skills. If you get sick in the future, you can't just rely on bloodletting and drinking talisman water to cure diseases. It is necessary to transform Gizhu province, just like transforming the grassland. Tang Ning's plan is to create a paradise here. In this way, not only materials from outside can be shipped in, but also specialties from Gizhu can be shipped out. The dignitaries outside are very fond of old Ganoderma lucidum and ginseng, and can often sell them for extremely high prices. When Su Mei conveyed this order to the 1st elder, the 1st elder had a troubled look on his face and said, the saint doesn't know something. Gizhu is poor. It would cost too much to dig plank roads and build trade routes here. Even if we spend all the Gu, even with the power of the clan, I'm afraid I won't be able to complete it. Su Mei glanced at her and asked, is 10 million taels of silver enough? The great elder's expression was stunned and she couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. She had never seen even 10,000 taels in her whole life. 10 million taels, this is such a huge number. This money can buy many supplies and hire many doctors. If it is used to build a plank road in the mountains, the lives of various tribes in the villages will be much easier. Gizhu has been poor for hundreds of thousands of years, but if there is an opportunity for improvement, why would they be willing to miss it? The great elder was so shocked by the number of 10 million taels that he forgot to answer for a moment. Sumei continued, I will give you 10 million taels first. If it is not enough, we will talk. The great elder finally came to his senses and nodded repeatedly, that's enough, that's enough. At this moment, the way she looked at Sumei changed again. The saint is the master of the Gu tribe and the land of Gizhu. She owns all the resources in Gizhu. From ancient times to the present, only the saint has reached out to them. How can a saint give them so much money with just a wave of her hand? She has always felt that being able to control the Gizhu region is the greatest benefit that the saints can get. Now it seems that they have gained even greater benefits. Although the Tang family is not short of money, it is impossible for Tang Ning and Sumei to carry 10 million taels with them. The money cannot be arranged until Tang Ning leaves Gizhu. The purpose of this trip was finally achieved, and he could leave here tomorrow. In addition, he also asked the great elder to release a few spies who were caught by them, and did not mention to them that Sumei became a saint. Tang Ning opened the door, poured out 2 pills from a porcelain bottle, threw them to the 4th elder and 8th elder who had been standing outside the door for a long time, and said, take it orally with warm water, and the poison in your body will be detoxified. The 4th elder and the 8th elder nodded their thanks and left quickly with the porcelain bottles. Watching their figures disappear, Tang Ning poured another one from the porcelain bottle and threw it into her mouth. The refreshing taste of mint instantly made her feel energetic. He was about to turn around and go back to his room when he saw a figure standing in the distance, pacing back and forth with his head lowered. He walked down the stilt building, walked slowly over, and asked, what are you doing? Brother Tang. Atuo was startled, then came back to his senses immediately, shook his head and said, no, it's nothing. Tang Ning glanced at her and saw her expression was different, and asked, do you have something to say to me? Atuo raised his head and said, Brother Tang and the saint are leaving tomorrow. I'm here to say goodbye to you. The girl couldn't hide her thoughts. Tang Ning looked at her and asked, do you also want to go out and see the outside world? Aduo's face suddenly turned red after being exposed, and he waved his hands hurriedly, no, it's pretty good here. Tang Ning smiled and said, if you want to follow, then just follow. Anyway, it could be at least half a year, or at most a year. We will be back. Atuo suddenly raised his head and was so surprised that he asked, is it really possible? Of course Tang Ning nodded and said, as long as you are willing. I do, she nodded quickly, and then said, I'll pack my things right now. Tang Ning looked at her quickly throwing away her bag and felt a little funny in her heart. He had long known that Aduo's dream was to go out of Gizhu and see what the world was like. This wish was not difficult to realize. He was able to find Sumei this time. She took all the credit, and Tang Ning would not be so stingy that she would not even help her realize this small wish. The great elder originally wanted to send some more people to escort him along the way, but Tang Ning refused. Once out of Gizhu, it was his territory, so there was no need for any other guards. He went to the temple to find Sumei. After a while, someone informed him that Elder Bai and Elder Gongsun wanted to see him. Let them come in, Sumei ordered, and not long after, sisters Baijin and Gongsun Yingxi walked in from outside. Gongsun Ying looked up, bowed and said, I've seen the saint. Baijin stood in the hall without saluting. She looked at Sumei and said, we have figured it out. Even if you help Lianguo restore the country in the name of the saint, the elders of other lineages will not agree to this matter. Shi Mei will do it on his own, I just hope that Xiaozhong won't stop it when the time comes. Sumei waved her hand and said, this is your 10th line's business. It's up to you whether 10th line wants to help the Liang royal family recover. Although Baijin and Gongsun Ying said this, Tang Ning didn't believe it at all, and asked Sumei to tell the elder to keep an eye on them to prevent them from causing any more trouble in Gizhu. However, before leaving, Tang Ning found out that Gong Sunying and Bai Jin were not staying in Gizhu, but were going to Wanzhou to do something. Tang Ning and Su Mei no longer passed through Wanzhou this time. They took a detour from Gizhu province to save a few days' journey back to Beijing. On the mountain road, a duo was carrying a small bundle. He turned around and waved to several elders, saying loudly, "We are leaving." Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 873. On the mountain road, the elders of Wangu sect watched the saint leave. "I have never heard of such a willful saint." An elder sighed softly and said, "It is a blessing or a curse for a saint woman to be like this for our religion." The great elder said, "Whether it is a blessing or a curse, we can only wait and see later." After he finished speaking, he looked at the two figures who followed the saint and said, "Follow them." Several people behind him stepped forward, and another elder reminded, "These two are the elders of the 10th lineage. They are very powerful. Even we can't defeat them easily. You should be careful." The two men immediately bowed and said, "I understand." After the two people left, the elder looked at the elder and said, "King Qian and his son are dead. The only one they can support is King Wu. If they can find King Wu." His eyes were slightly sharp, and he made a gesture of wiping his neck, and said, "In this way, their idea of returning to the country will become a dream, and our clan will not be dragged into that quagmire." The great elder's eyes flashed with light, which obviously coincided with his thoughts. After a long time, she nodded and whispered, "If we can find King Wu, we will simply deal with him and cut off the thought of the 10th pulse." The eyes of several elders met in the air, and they all saw murderous intent in each other's eyes. Wanzhou City. Two figures, an old woman and a middle-aged woman, walked down the street, crossed the main street, and turned into an alley. Seeing this, several figures falling far behind them took a few steps quickly and followed them in. However, when they entered the alley, they realized that it was a dead end. Except for a wall not far ahead, where did the people come from? Not good. The expressions of several people suddenly changed, and they were about to exit, but before they could turn around, they felt a sharp pain in their necks, and the next moment they lost consciousness and fell to the ground. Bai Jin walked out from behind them with a gloomy expression and said, "The great elder is indeed insidious. Their goal is King Wu, right?" Gong Sunying nodded and said, "King Qian and the crown prince are dead. If something happens to King Wu, there will be no hope for our restoration. The first elder has a good plan." Bai Jin looked at the people on the ground and said, "Wanzhou is too close to Gizhu. The great elder and others may already know that King Wu is here. In this case, Wanzhou cannot stay here." Gong Sunying thought for a while and said, "I want to go to Yunnan, and the king of Wu will leave it to you." Bai Jin nodded and said, "Let's go find King Wu first." The two ignored the unconscious people in the alley, walked out of the alley, and walked along the street towards a high-profile mansion. A moment later, in front of the Liang family gate, Gong Sunying looked at the seal on the Liang family door and his expression changed drastically. Bai Jin glanced at her and asked, "Didn't you say that King Wu is here? Could it be that you can't even believe me?" Gong Sunying did not answer, but stopped a person passing by and asked, "What happened to the Liang family? Where is their family?" The passerby said, "I don't even know this. This happened 2 months ago. The Liang family was in big trouble. I heard they were colluding with some religion. No one in the family, including the governor, ran away. They were all caught." Gong Sunying asked, "What religion are you colluding with?" "I don't know." The man shook his head and said, "These days, the government has been arresting people. It just stopped a few days ago. I don't know if they have been arrested." After the passerby left, Bai Jin came over and asked, "Were they arrested?" "Probably not." Gong Sunying shook his head and said, "I have set up several strongholds here. Let's go look for them one by one." Next, The two walked through most of the city and searched several courtyards, but couldn't find any trace. A moment later, in an area where poor people gathered in the city, Gong Sunying stood in front of a dilapidated courtyard and said, "This is the last place." She walked forward and knocked lightly on the door. Not long after, a vigilant voice came from behind the door, "Who?" Hearing this voice, Gong Sunying finally breathed a sigh of relief and said, "It's me." The courtyard door opened the next moment. An old man stood behind the door, glanced at the two of them, and said, "Come in." "Elder Gong Sun, you are finally back." A middle-aged man came out of the room, looked at Gong Sunying, and asked, "How is it? Did you succeed?" Gong Sunying looked at the middle-aged man, nodded and said, "She has become a saint, but some changes have occurred, and the date of the incident may be delayed." When the middle-aged man heard this, the excitement on his face subsided, but he quickly smiled and said, "I've been waiting for this for so many years, I don't care if I wait a little longer." Gong Sunying looked at him and said, "There is one more important thing. Your Highness can no longer stay in Wanzhou." "Why is this?" The middle-aged man looked at her and asked, "Are you worried that the Wanzhou government will find us?" "You can rest assured about this. If we don't want to show up, they will never find us in this Wanzhou city." "It's not the government." Gong Sunying shook his head and said, "It's the Great Elder." "What?" When the old man heard this, his expression changed. "It would be difficult for the Chen government to find them, but if the Great Elder wanted to find them, there were countless ways." The middle-aged man looked calm and said, "It doesn't matter, it's just a matter of finding another place to live. After so many years, I have already become accustomed to it." He looked at Gong Sunying and asked, "Where are we going this time?" Gong Sunying said, "For your Highness's great cause, I am going to the Yunnan region. During this time, your Highness should follow my senior sister." The middle-aged man looked at her and asked, "What are you doing in Dian?" Gong Sunying's eyes flashed with strange light, and he said, "The Wangu sect and the Gu clan do not want to be involved in the restoration of the country, but if those rebellious officials and traitors take the initiative to provoke them, I don't believe that the Great Elder can still sit still." The middle-aged man raised his eyebrows and said, "You want to start a war between Yunnan and Guizhou?" Gong Sunying did not deny it and said, "This is our only chance." The middle-aged man nodded and said, "You can go with peace of mind. I will obey Elder Bai's arrangements in everything." Gong Sunying only stayed here for half a day and left in a hurry. Bai Jin looked at the middle-aged man and said, "The people sent by the Great Elder were knocked unconscious by us. The Great Elder should notice this place soon. It is not suitable to stay here for a long time. We will leave early tomorrow morning." The middle-aged man looked at her and asked, "Where are we going?" Bai Jin narrowed his eyes slightly and said, "The further away from here, the better, so far away that the Great Elder's hand can't reach." The middle-aged man thought for a while and asked tentatively, "Is it true?" Bai Jin nodded and said, "Capital, master." "Capital." The eighth elder looked up at the majestic city wall and sighed, "This is the capital of Chen State, it is indeed extraordinary." Although the fourth elder had a look of shock in his eyes, he still looked at him with contempt and said disdainfully, "You have never seen the world, a bumpkin." The eighth elder glanced at her and said with the same disdain, "How many worlds have you seen, a country bumpkin?" The two looked at each other, snorted, and looked away at the same time. The eighth elder and the fourth elder had been bickering all the way. They had disliked each other since they came from Guizhou province. During this journey, although no one made a move due to the presence of Tang Ning and Su Mei, they did not give in. With whom? Tang Ning was used to this and ignored them. After entering the city, she went straight back to the Tang mansion. Xiao Ru Xiao I and Tang Yao Yao left with him, and even Qing Xiu followed them. They should have met Li Tianlan in Chu State by now, so even if he returned home after a long absence, he didn't have any special feelings. There should be only a few servants left at home. What is strange is that there are two porters at the door. The porter saw him getting off the carriage. After being stunned, he immediately stepped forward and bowed, "Sir, come back." Tang Ning nodded and walked into the mansion. As soon as he stepped through the door, he heard the sound of footsteps. Qing ran quickly holding the hem of her skirt. She called out "Uncle" in surprise and threw herself into his arms. Tang Ning lowered his head and stared blankly at Qing who was hugging him tightly, and asked in shock, "Why are you here?" As soon as he finished speaking, Qing let go of him again, picked up the hem of her skirt again, and ran staggeringly inside, shouting, Miss, come out quickly, my uncle is back." After a while, Tang Ning looked at Zhongyi, Su Are You, Tang Yao Yao and Xiao Xiao who were walking out quickly, with shocked expressions on their faces, and murmured, "Why are you? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 874. According to Tang Ning's plan, while he went to Kandy to pick up Su Mei, the other ladies went to Chu State to join Li Tianlan. In this way, he would not have many worries in the capital. He only needed to come back to pick up Zhao Man, and from then on he would not be constrained by Chen State, and he could go wherever he wanted in the world. But after he returned to the capital, he saw that they were still at home. Zhongyi sighed and said, "After my husband left the capital, a lot of things happened. I will explain them to you one by one." Tang Ning shook her head and said, "I have to go to the palace now. When I come back from the palace, you can tell me slowly." He was in the distant Kandy these days, and he really didn't know what happened in the capital. Judging from Zhongyi's expression, a lot of things happened in the capital in the past few months, and he might not be able to finish talking about them in a short time. It would be better for him to report to the palace first. The news from Kandy was confidential. Unlike the 2 times in Jiangnan and the grassland, Tang Ning did not send back any news, and Emperor Chen still didn't know what happened there. If he knew that Tang Ning did not report to the palace after returning to Beijing, there would be more unnecessary trouble. Zhongyi looked at him and asked, "Are you going to the palace to see His Majesty?" Tang Ning nodded and said, "I have to report to His Majesty first." Zhongyi shook his head slightly and said, "Even if you go to the palace, you can't see His Majesty." Tang Ning was surprised and asked, "Why?" Zhongyi said, "His Majesty." Tang Ning's heart skipped a beat and asked, "Is he dead?" "His Majesty has not passed away yet." Zhongyi looked at him helplessly and said, "But in the past few months, His Majesty has been seriously ill. 2 months ago, he could not get up. The morning court has not been held for a long time. All the affairs in the court are handled by the Shaanxi province." Tang Ning frowned slightly. The Emperor Chen was ill when he left Beijing. At that time, he thought that Emperor Chen fell ill because of the rebellion of Prince Kong, and that he would get better as long as he recuperated. However, he did not expect that during the months he was away, Emperor Chen's illness became more serious. Judging from Zhongyi's description, it was clear that he would not be long before his death. Tang Ning suddenly thought of something, looked at her, and asked, "Who has been in charge of the Shaanxi province in the past few months?" "The Prime Minister." Zhongyi shook her head and said, "The Prime Minister is sick at home and has been recuperating in the mansion for several months." Tang Ning asked again, "Is it Prince Huai?" Zhongyi continued to shake his head, and after a long time he said, "It's Prince Duan." Tang Ning finally realized that in the short few months he was away from Beijing, the capital had been turned upside down. Emperor Chen's illness did not get better after recuperation as he expected, but it deteriorated rapidly within a month of his absence. The morning court went from once every 3 days to once every 5 days to 11 times, and finally became indefinitely shelved. At the beginning, after Wang Xiang fell ill, the Shangshu province was in charge of Wang Huai, and the affairs of the court were also handled by him. However, it didn't take long for Emperor Chen to gradually let Wang Duan get in touch with the core power. After Wang Duan entered the Shangshu province, it took only half a month to squeeze out Wang Huai. Without Wang Xiang, Wang Huai was the absolute master of the Shangshu province. Tang Ning didn't believe that Wang Duan could squeeze out Wang Huai in such a short time. There was no support from Emperor Chen. Obviously, even if Wang Duan was a waste, his status was higher than that of Wang Huai in the eyes of Emperor Chen. When he was seriously ill and needed to consider the ownership of the throne, Wang Duan still ranked before Wang Huai. This was not what a wise and sage emperor would do, and it was not like the style of Emperor Chen. The only explanation was that there were some unknown things in the dusty history of the royal family more than 20 years ago. The change in the situation in the capital seemed sudden, but it was reasonable after careful consideration. If Emperor Chen was healthy and could live for another 10 or 20 years, there is no doubt that Prince Run Zhaoyuan would be his best choice for succession. However, he suddenly became seriously ill and did not have enough time to wait for Zhaoyuan to grow up. With adult princes in Beijing, it was not in accordance with etiquette and logic to make an ignorant child the emperor. It happened that during this period, Prince Duan stayed quietly in the mansion and did nothing. This calmness was a great advantage in the eyes of Emperor Chen. Being an emperor does not require great talent and military strategy. As long as he sits in that high position, all things will be done for him by the people below. What they are afraid of is that he has no talent and likes to make decisions. In this way, no matter how powerful the country is, it will be defeated by him sooner or later. Tang Ning did not know how many psychological choices Emperor Chen had gone through during this period, but it was certain that no matter how the process was, the balance in his heart eventually leaned towards Prince Duan. Tang Ning looked at Zhongyi and asked, "You didn't leave Chen State because of Prince Duan, right?" Zhongyi nodded and said guiltily, "It's all my fault. If I had asked them to hurry up, we could have reached Chu State before Prince Duan sent someone to stop us." Tang Ning held her in his arms, patted her shoulder gently, and said, "It's okay, it's not your fault. They left the capital this time for fun. If they just hurried on, they would attract other people's attention." The sudden illness of Emperor Chen and the reversal of Prince Duan were indeed beyond his expectation, which disrupted his original plan. But it didn't matter. Even if a salted fish turned over, it was still a salted fish. The Fang family and concubine Fang Shu would not watch Prince Duan take that position. They had never been too eager for the throne, but because Zhao Yuan was too young, he could wait until Emperor Chen took the initiative to pass the throne to him. This was the result, and also the premise. The premise for the Fang family and concubine Fang Shu, as well as the forces behind them to remain dormant and forbearing, was that Emperor Chen would eventually pass the throne to Zhao Yuan. If Emperor Chen himself went off topic, then they would inevitably take some unharmonious measures. Tang Ning comforted Zhongyi and said, "I have to go to the palace first anyway. You guys wait for me at home." Zhongyi nodded and then noticed the cross-dressing girl standing behind Tang Ning. She looked at her and asked, "Who is this sister?" A duo hurriedly stepped forward and said, "My name is a duo." "Nice to meet you, madam." Tang Ning looked at Su Mei and said, "Tell them slowly about what happened in Kandy." When Tang Ning changed her clothes and left the Tang family, a duo was already familiar with them. They called each other sisters. With her cheerful personality, she integrated faster than Tang Ning imagined. The palace, somewhere in the corner. After Tang Ning entered the palace, he asked a eunuch to report, but he had been sitting in this corner for half an hour and still had not been summoned. Soon, a maid walked in slowly, bowed to Tang Ning, and said, "Meet the right Prime Minister." Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "What did your Majesty say?" The maid said, "Your Majesty is not feeling well. He has been in a coma for a long time and has not woken up yet." I am afraid he will not wake up today. You may come back tomorrow. Tang Ning stood up and looked at the screen on the side of the hall. He quickly retracted his gaze and said, "Then I will come back later." He walked out of the hall slowly, and soon, a shadow walked out from behind the screen. Concubine Tang Hui looked outside, her face was a little gloomy, and she lowered her voice and said, "He is back." Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 875. Tang Ning came back from his Hu and went to the palace to resume her duties, but she didn't see Emperor Chen. The palace maid asked him to come back tomorrow, but she was afraid that Tang Ning might not be able to see Emperor Chen tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow. Tang Ning's power was limited to the court, and there was nothing she could do in the palace. And in the past few months since he left Beijing, concubine Tang Hui's hands may have reached out to every corner of the palace. After he came out of the palace, he did not go home. Instead, he went to the province of Shangshu. It has been a few months since I came here, and the changes in Shangshu province are also not small. At a glance, the people sitting in key positions are all unfamiliar faces, and the Shangshu Yushan and the left and right ministers who are familiar to Tang Ning are sitting in the remote seats. In the corner, where even the sun doesn't shine. Tang Ning's appearance immediately caused a commotion in the Shangshu province. Although he has not been in the capital for the past few months, these short few months are not enough for everyone to forget the right minister and the real master of Shangshu province. Tang Xiang. Hello, Mr. Tang. I've met Mr. Tang. Everyone stood up and saluted, and Tang Ning nodded her head. Minister Yushan came out of the corner with a surprised and happy expression, and asked, "Master Tang, when did you return to Beijing?" Tang Ning said, "Just now." Shangshu Yushan looked at him and asked tentatively, "Have you met your majesty?" Not yet. Tang Ning shook her head and said, "The female officer said that his majesty is still asleep and asked me to go and take a look tomorrow." Shangshu Yushan sighed and said, "These adults in the court have not seen your majesty for more than a month." Even officials from the central government had not seen Huang Chen for such a long time. It seemed that the matter was more serious than Tang Ning imagined. Tang Ning was about to ask Shangshu Yushan some specific details when suddenly a figure came over, bowed slightly to him and said, "I have met Prime Minister Tang." Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "Who is this?" Shangshu Yushan immediately said, "This is Shangshu Zhuoken, Mr. Li." When Tang Ning first came to Shangshu province, his position was Shangshu Zhuoken. At that time, Shangshu Zhuoken went home to serve his elderly mother. He didn't recognize this Zhuoken who appeared out of nowhere. After Shangshu Zhuochen greeted him, he smiled and said, "I still have some important things to deal with, so I will leave first." After Shangshu Zhuochen left, Tang Ning looked at Shangshu Yushan and asked, "Who is this person?" Shangshu Yushan looked around and lowered his voice, "This Lord Li is a confidant of King Duan." The two prime ministers were absent, and Shangshu Yushan was left out. Shangshu Zhuoken was a confidant of King Duan. There were also some unfamiliar faces in key positions in Shangshu province. It seemed that King Duan was not as incompetent or short-term as Tang Ning imagined. At that time, he actually turned Shangshu province into his back garden. Tang Ning looked at Shangshu Yushan and asked with a smile, "Isn't Master Han having a hard time during this period?" Shangshu Yushan looked complicated and said, "We ministers just want to avoid being implicated in the fight above. It doesn't matter if life is a little difficult." He looked at Tang Ning and said, "Master Tang has been away from Beijing for such a long time. I don't know the current situation in Beijing. I need to be more careful in the future." Shangshu Yushan's reminder came from the heart. Since the fall of King Kong, all the officials have speculated on which prince your majesty will pass the throne to. Some guessed King Hui, and some guessed King Run. They all had their own opinions, and no one had any idea. Convinced no one. At that time, King Duan had been excluded from their choice. After all, King Duan was too mediocre, and his performance during the rebellion of King Tiankong was too bad. Everyone saw it and remembered it in their hearts. They thought that His Majesty was absolutely it is impossible to pass the throne to him again. However, it turned out that everyone was wrong. His Majesty's body deteriorated rapidly in a short period of time. He did not choose the most talented King Huai, nor the most potential King Run, but the most mediocre King Duan. This did not meet everyone's expectations, but Your Majesty is Your Majesty. Your Majesty does things without having to explain to anyone. Everyone only needs to know one fact. Prince Duan is the future crown prince and the next emperor of the Chen kingdom. He can only be loyal to him and cannot offend him. Therefore, during this period of time, King Duan, who had no power at all, quickly gathered a large group of cronies around him. This time, there were obviously more people choosing to take sides. After all, King Huai was so outstanding. Compared with King Duan, he was even more outstanding. When it came to choosing one of them to inherit the throne, everyone knew how to choose. However, His Majesty I still chose King Duan. This only shows one thing. His Majesty would rather choose a pig to be the emperor than choose King Huai. Even if the iron tree blooms and a sow climbs the tree, King Huai will not be able to sit in that position. This made them hesitate to stand in line. In less than a month, King Duan went from having nothing to being surrounded by powerful officials, and his power was even greater than that of the Tang family at its peak. Tang Ning had heard all this from the mouth of Shang Shuyushan. He was an official in the DPRK and had much more information in this area than Xiao Yi did. Tang Ning thanked him for the reminder and left the Shangshu province. She still did not leave the palace directly, but went around to another yamen. In the imperial hospital, Ling Yuheng heard the announcement and walked out quickly, cupping his fists and saying, "Ling Yuheng has seen Uncle Master." Tang Ning waved her hand and said, "No need to be polite." Ling Yuheng had a smile on his face and asked, "When did Uncle Master return to Beijing?" "I just arrived today." After a few brief greetings, Tang Ning stopped talking and said, "I have something to ask you." Seeing his solemn look, Ling Yuheng's expression became serious and said, "Uncle, please speak." Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "What's going on with His Majesty's body?" Mentioning this matter, Ling Yuheng sighed and said, "Since King Kang's rebellion, His Majesty's health has been deteriorating day by day. The Taiyuan hospital has tried every prescription, but it still doesn't work at all." Tang Ning asked directly, "What disease does Your Majesty suffer from?" Ling Yuheng shook his head and said, "Your Majesty's body has no other symptoms. He is just getting weaker and sleeping for longer and longer every day. The Taiyuan hospital has not made a definite conclusion. Judging from Your Majesty's physical condition, I am afraid that the deadline is coming. The human body is a very complex system. Even the most experienced doctors dare not say that they have seen all diseases, let alone these imperial doctors who do not have modern medical knowledge and technology." Tang Ning only learned some superficial medical skills. He didn't know what kind of disease Chen Huang was suffering from. He only knew that he seemed to be dying. Recalling that Huang Chen was still alive and healthy a few months ago, Tang Ning sighed softly, looked at Ling Yuheng and asked, "How long does Your Majesty have?" Ling Yuheng said, "As long as half a year, as little as." He didn't finish his words, but Tang Ning knew what he meant. Chen Huang could still live for at least half a year. This was only the most optimistic situation. If his condition worsened, he might die at any time. After walking out of the palace, Tang Ning's mood was a little complicated. Faced with such a thing, he always felt a little uncomfortable when facing a king and a minister. Moreover, besides being a king and a minister, Emperor Chen and him had a more complicated relationship. When he walked home with complicated emotions, at the door of Duan Wang Mansion, Shang Shizoucheng looked at the concierge at the door and said anxiously, "Go and report quickly, I have something important to see your highness. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Wrong Xiao Wrong. Chapter 876. P.S. It turns out that the chapter names were wrong several days ago. I just discovered it today. The first ones will not be changed, and the later ones will be postponed. Prince Duan's mansion. As one of the few princes who remained in the capital, Prince Duan has always been trained as a prince. Others who received the same treatment as him were King Kong and King Huai. Now that King Kong failed in his rebellion and was imprisoned, King Huai was also pushed out of the center of power, and King Duan once again became the focus of the courtiers' eyes. According to unreliable news, His Majesty is now in poor health and has officially prepared to appoint King Duan as the crown prince, and will issue an edict in the near future. The prince is the crown prince of a country. Unless the prince is deposed, when the king dies, there is no need for another edict to pass the throne, and the prince can take over the position of the previous emperor. His Majesty is now seriously ill and unable to govern. Once King Duan takes charge of the East Palace, he will take charge of all court affairs and exercise the power of the king. Today's King Duan is undoubtedly the most beautiful person in the capital. This kind of scenery even exceeds what he has ever seen before. However, his journey has not been smooth sailing. Everyone watched the Tang family go from prosperity to decline, and Prince Duan went from being favored to falling out of favor to being favored and then falling out of favor again. It can no longer be described as twists and turns. However, in matters like seizing a legitimate son, the result has always been more important than the process. No matter what, he succeeded. In the near future, everything he has lost will be returned tenfold and 100-fold. Even in the past few years, his declining dignitaries and officials will usher in their spring again. When one person attained enlightenment, chickens and dogs ascended to heaven, Prince Duan gained power again, and the servants of Prince Duan's palace were also honored. The porter glanced at Shang Shizoucheng and said, "Wait here for now, I will report." Prince Duan's mansion has long been different from the past. From a sparsely populated house to a bustling city, officials and dignitaries from the capital came one after another to pay their allegiance to Prince Duan. Even the concierge was in high spirits. Unless he was an official at the level of the 6 ministers, he would not do it at all. Look with a straight eye. In Prince Duan's palace, Prince Duan was giving a banquet to a group of powerful officials. The banquet was full of delicacies and fine wines. He didn't know how many glasses he drank. He felt like he was in a state of ecstasy, and a feeling of looking down on the world arose in his heart. He certainly has the confidence. Today's Chen state is domestically stable, the people live in peace, and under the iron heel of heavy cavalry. Except for some minor problems in the western regions, it can be said that all barbarians have surrendered. The people and officials in the DPRK generally believe that this is the most powerful state since the founding of Chen state. In a few years, some great scholars even called this the government of Ding Yuan. Such a powerful Chen state will soon be his. When his father returns to the west in a few days, he will be the new emperor and the master of these thousands of miles of rivers and mountains. He has the right to be proud. When the time comes, no, from now on, he will eliminate the enemies who have caused him trouble one by one, and the one he hates the most is of course his nominal cousin, who almost put him in a desperate situation. Tang Ning, the current right minister. King Duan drank all the wine in a wine glass, and a servant came to report, "Shang Shuzoucheng wants to see you." Since he regained power, he has recruited many officials one after another, but to his regret, he has not recruited any people or families like the 6 ministers and several major generals. He secretly hated in his heart that these people who did not know how to appreciate people could not be arrogant for much longer. By the time he had completely secured his position in the East Palace, it would be time to cleanse the court. Shang Shizuokan Liqi was a confidant he installed in Shangsha province, and he spent a lot of effort on this. Even though he is now considered to have sole power, he cannot have the final say in everything. The 6 ministers, the ministers of the 9 temples, and the generals of the 16 guards could still not betray his face. King Duan paid great attention to Li Qi. Now the affairs of the court were handled by the Minister of Finance, and Wang Xiang took a long leave. Minister Zhuoken was a gun in his hand, and he had accomplished many things with this gun. King Duan looked at the servant and said, "Please come in." Shang Zhuochen walked in a hurry, looking a little flustered. King Duan glanced at him and asked, "Why are you panicking?" Li Qi looked solemn and said, "Your Highness, Tang Ning has returned to Beijing. A person's name is like a tree's shadow." Although Li Qi has not been serving as Minister Zhuoken for a long time, Tang Ning's reputation has always been ringing in his ears. When he saw him appearing in Shangsha province today, he immediately panicked and hurried to pick up the book. "Report to the palace." "What?" Prince Duan's expression suddenly changed when he heard this, but then he thought that things were no longer the same as before. He was no longer the Prince Duan who had nothing, and there was no need to be afraid of Tang Ning. So what if he comes back? King Duan became even more furious because of the momentary fear that just occurred in his heart. He said with a sullen face, "He came back just in time. I happen to have some accounts to settle with him." If it weren't for Tang Ning, the Tang family would now be the most powerful family in Beijing, with countless vassals under his command. He would have been able to defeat King Kong long ago and sit on the position of crown prince. Although the result has not changed now, the process has become countless times more difficult. Thinking about it now, he is still a little sad and wants to cry. He was miserable. He was lifted up into the clouds by his father again and again, and fell down from the clouds to the bottom again and again. If it were an ordinary person, after a few times, he would have been tortured into a lunatic. He hated Tang Ning, so after taking power, he sent people to imprison Tang Ning's family in the capital as soon as possible. If the Xiao family, Fang family, Ling family, and other families had not given them more protection during this period, he would have already. The family took action, and it was just right that he was back now. He also wanted to let him feel what it felt like to lose everything. The minister of the left saw the murderous intent on his face and hurriedly said, "Your Highness, Tang Ning is not like other people. If you want to touch him, you have to think long and hard." Prince Duan glanced at him and said, "I am not a fool. He is at least a right prime minister. How can he be overthrown so easily?" A sneer appeared on his face and he said, "Besides, he has made me suffer so much. How can I give him a quick death?" The minister of the left looked at him and asked, "What does your Highness mean?" Prince Duan waved to him, and the minister of the left leaned over to listen to what Prince Duan said. A strange light gradually appeared in his eyes. After Tang Ning left the palace, he sent someone to inform the Xiao family and other families of his return to the capital. He also asked Qing to go to the Anyang princess's mansion and let her enter the palace to help convey a message to Zhao Man. In the past few months since he left the capital, the situation in the capital was not very good, but it was still under control. Prince Duan seemed to be powerful, but in fact, he had not won over any of the people who really held the military and political power in the capital, such as the 6 ministers and the generals of the 16 guards. No matter what Prince Duan did, he had to meet Emperor Chen first, but the palace had fallen into the hands of concubine Tang Hui, and things that were very common before had become extremely difficult. Tang Ning was walking slowly in the yard, and soon, hurried footsteps came from the door. Zhao Man ran in from outside with her skirt in her hands. When she saw Tang Ning, her eyes turned red, and she quickened her pace and trotted over, and flew into his arms. She rested her head on Tang Ning's chest, tears in her eyes, and choked with sobs, "Father, father." Tang Ning put one hand around her slender waist, and patted her shoulder gently with the other hand, comforting her, "It's okay, your Majesty is the Emperor, and there must be good luck." Even though she knew that Emperor Chen's body was at the end of its life, Tang Ning could only comfort Zhao Man like this at this moment. In fact, during this short journey from the palace to home, he had already thought about it. If Emperor Chen really couldn't make it, then within these few months, it would be the time for Prince Duan to be rampant for the last time. He didn't even need to do anything. Concubine Fang Shu and the Fang family, who were hiding behind the scenes, and the forces behind Zhao Yuan, could push Zhao Yuan to that position. At that time, it would be the day when he took Zhao Man and his family away from the capital. When Zhao Man was holding Tang Ning and crying sadly, a figure walked in slowly from outside. Xiao Ju was holding a swaddle in his arms, and the baby's eyes were rolling around. Xiao Ju paused, and seeing the situation in the courtyard, he immediately reached out to cover the baby's eyes and whispered, "Don't look." You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 877. Zhao Man was so excited that he didn't notice that he was still in the outer courtyard. After Xiao Ju appeared, Zhao Man ran away with a red face. Xiao Ju held the child and looked at Tang Ning with a strange look in his eyes. Even though he had guessed that Tang Ning and the princess should have a vague relationship, seeing them hugging each other with his own eyes was different from the shock he had just guessed. Tang Ning didn't explain, looked at the little guy in Xiao Ju's arms, and said, "Congratulations. Qing Er just told him that Lu Ya gave birth a few months ago, and both mother and child were safe." The Xiao family, which had few descendants, had an heir. The old master Xiao held a banquet in the mansion for half a month, and the Emperor Chen, who was still on the sickbed, also issued an imperial edict, rewarding many rewards, and stated in the imperial edict that when he grew up, he could inherit Xiao Ju's title. Too many powerful people would increase the burden on the court. The titles of the Chen kingdom were rarely hereditary. The significance of this imperial edict was very important. If nothing unexpected happened, it could ensure the Xiao family's wealth for decades. When talking about his son, Xiao Ju's face was full of pride, but he had suffered too many losses in the past, so this time he was much more restrained in front of Tang Ning, and changed the subject. "You have been to the palace, right? Have you seen His Majesty?" Tang Ning shook his head. "A lot of things have happened in the capital during the months you were away," Xiao Ju sighed and said, "the court and the palace are now completely controlled by Prince Duan and concubine Tang Hui." "Do they control the 6 ministers or the 2 prime ministers?" Tang Ning shook his head and asked. "The left and right Yulin guards are still controlled by the Ling family and the Li family. They are all your Majesty's personal guards. How can concubine Tang Hui control the palace?" "That's not the case." Xiao Ju heard this and said, "Prince Duan can't move the 6 ministers at present, but the 6 ministers can't do anything to him. But there is one thing you said wrong just now. The left Yulin guard is not controlled by the Ling family. Ling Yun is no longer the general of the left Yulin guard. He was transferred to the West Gate Guard within 2 days of your leaving Beijing. Ling Yun has been the general of the left Yulin guard for quite a while. He is a confidant of Emperor Chen and cannot be replaced at will." Tang Ning looked at Xiao Ju and asked, "This was it also done by Prince Duan?" "Not this time." Xiao Ju shook his head and said, "During the time when you just left Beijing, the Shangsha province was originally controlled by Prince Hui. He felt that the Ling family occupied the Jinyue and Yulanwei, which was a bit inappropriate, so he transferred Ling Yunping over." Tang Ning thought for a while and asked, "Who is the new general of Ziyue?" Xiao Ju thought for a while and said, "It seems to be called Chen Xingyun." This is the first time Tang Ning has heard this name. It is the first time he has heard of a name that can sit in the position of General Ziyue. Tang Ning continued to ask, "What is this person's background?" Xiao Ju said, "He doesn't have much background. He was originally a general of the border army. He returned to Beijing after the court withdrew its troops in the northwest. The Ling family has control over the Jinyue and Yulanwei, which is equivalent to half of the capital being controlled by them. It is indeed a bit inappropriate. But over the years, even Emperor Chen has not said anything. This move by Prince Huai surprised Tang Ning a little. He knew King Huai. He was a person who didn't care about anything that didn't concern him. It was not his style to transfer Ling Yun out and arrange for someone with no identity or background and no affiliated forces to come in, risking offending the Ling family. But leaving these aside, his decision was reasonable. Moreover, since the new general Zhou Yue had no background or faction, others could not find any faults with King Huai. When Tang Ning thought of King Huai, he felt that a person like him could be driven out of the Shangshu province by Prince Duan within half a month, which made him doubt his judgment on Emperor Chen. Judging from the various performances of Emperor Chen during his reign, he was undoubtedly a wise emperor with great courage that no emperor in history had. But judging from the choices made by the princes, his wisdom and intelligence disappeared without a trace. Even a pig sitting in his position could make better choices than him. Xiaoju held the child in one hand and patted Tang Ning's shoulder with the other hand, saying, "I know you have your own ideas. What I want to say is that no matter what happens, my father and I will stand by you." This sentence is very important, especially when it comes from the mouth of the general of Ximenwei. Tang Ning smiled and patted his shoulder and said, "I know." He just returned to Beijing today and found that the situation in Beijing has changed so much. Before making some decisions, he needs to meet some people first. Xiaoju keenly discovered that there was an unfamiliar figure among the women of the Tang family. He pointed at a duo and asked, "Is this the fifth or the sixth child in your family?" Xiaoju didn't wait for Tang Ning's answer. The child in his arms started crying. He hurriedly took it out to find Lu Yat. A duo came over and looked at Tang Ning with a strange look. She blushed and said, "Brother Tang, you have so many wives." The Gu tribe is monogamous, so the situation in the Tang family is a little unexpected in her opinion. The eyes of the fourth and eighth elders looking at Tang Ning were also full of surprise. However, this kind of surprise was a shocking surprise. It was not until this moment that they knew Tang Ning's identity. Before this, they only thought that the saint married him, which was a great commitment. Apart from his good looks, he didn't seem to have anything special. However, what they didn't expect was that he was actually the right prime minister of the state of Chen, a person who was second only to the first person in the state of Chen and above 10,000 people. Although the Gu tribe has always been proud, they are not so arrogant as to think that they can compare with the Chen kingdom. The fourth elder watched him walk out of the mansion and murmured, "I didn't expect that he actually has such an identity." The eighth elder stroked his beard and said, "But it seems that he seems to have encountered some troubles." Tang Ning left the mansion and sent Zhao Man back to the palace first, and then went to visit Wang Xiang. He wanted Zhao Man to bring a message to Emperor Chen, but he didn't expect that now even she couldn't see Emperor Chen. Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "Can you see Eunuch Wei?" Zhao Man said, "Eunuch Wei has always served my father. After my father fell ill, concubine Hui also did not allow the eunuchs and maids in the palace to leave the palace." Tang Ning said, "I want you to help me bring a message to Eunuch Wei." Zhao Man thought about it and said, "I'll try." Compared with Emperor Chen, Wei Jian should be easier to contact. He is the closest person to Emperor Chen. There is no difference between seeing him and seeing Emperor Chen. No matter what, Tang Ning needed to know what Emperor Chen was thinking. If even Wei Jian couldn't help, he could only try to go around through the Queen Mother. After Zhao Man returned to the palace, Tang Ning walked towards the Prime Minister Wang's residence. Since he left Beijing and Prince Duan took power, Prime Minister Wang also took sick leave, which lasted for half a year. The Prime Minister never showed up in front of the ministers again. The people and officials all speculated that Prime Minister Wang was probably also seriously ill like His Majesty. It seemed that the deadline was approaching. When the two biggest pillars of the court fell one after another, it was unknown what kind of chaos the court would be in. Tang Ning asked someone to bring a cart of precious medicinal herbs and supplements to the door of the Wang family and explained his purpose. When the doorman saw him, he was immediately shocked and said respectfully, "The master is at home, Prime Minister Tang, please come in with me." Tang Ning walked into the Wang family, passed through several doors, and saw a figure standing in the yard in front of him from a distance. The man had his back to him, and his body moved left and right, forward and backward, obviously practicing martial arts. He performed an unknown set of boxing techniques, which were extremely powerful. Tang Ning could feel the sharpness from a distance. The old man performing the boxing techniques was obviously not seriously ill. In fact, he was in very good health. Tang Ning initially estimated that even two Xiaojus were not his opponents, let alone the old men of the same age. It was widely rumored in the court that Wang Xiang was seriously ill and would soon pass away, but what they didn't know was that even among the civil and military ministers in the court, few could survive a few moves from Wang Xiang. Tang Ning turned around and looked at the servants who were carrying the precious medicinal herbs and supplements he brought to the Wang family. He waved his hand and said, "Put them back in the car." Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 878. Wang Xiang walked over with vigorous steps, shook his head and said, "How can you take back what you gave away?" Tang Ning said, "They are some supplements. They were originally intended to be given to Wang Xiang to replenish his body. But now it seems that Wang Xiang won't need them anymore. It will be useful sooner or later." Wang Xiang smiled and signaled to the palace servants, "Move it down." Prime Minister Wang and Tang Ning walked into the inner hall. After sitting down, they looked at Tang Ning and asked, "Prime Minister Tang has returned from Guizhou. Is he bringing some good news?" Tang Ning nodded and said, "The old troops of the Liang kingdom wanted to restore the country, but now they have been quelled." Wang Xiang stroked his beard and said with a smile, "I know that if Tang Xiang takes action, there will be no problem that cannot be solved. Guizhou will be stable, and the court can concentrate on dealing with the western regions." Tang Ning looked up at him and said, "The land of Guizhou is stable, but the capital is not very stable. As Prime Minister, can Wang Xiang just watch this?" Wang Xiang knew what he meant. In the few months since he left the capital, the situation in the capital had changed drastically, and there was clearly some blame in his tone. However, Wang Xiang was not angry. He smiled and said, "It is His Majesty's wish that Prince Duan takes over the Shangshu province. It is His Majesty's wish that King Huai is squeezed out. Although I am the Prime Minister, I cannot go against His Majesty's wishes." Tang Ning looked at the Prime Minister with a smile on her face and said, "Does the Prime Minister mean to support Prince Duan to take over the East Palace and inherit the throne soon?" The Prime Minister did not admit or deny, but looked at Tang Ning and asked, "Sir Tang, can you watch the country that you and your Majesty finally settled down, be ruined like this?" Tang Ning said nonchalantly, "Yes." Although he had different feelings for Chengguo compared to other places, this was all Chen Wang's choice. He didn't care about it anymore. What did Tang Ning care about? But Wang Xiang cannot. He is the Prime Minister of Chen State, and the Wang family is also a large family in the capital, with countless people behind him. It is impossible for them to watch Chen State turn from prosperity to decline. What's more, once King Duan comes to power, the good days of these people will come to an end. Prime Minister Wang opened his mouth, but he didn't expect Tang Ning to answer so simply, which blocked what he wanted to say next. Tang Ning naturally saw the change in Wang Xiang's expression. He wants his granddaughter to be the queen, but he still doesn't want to do anything. How can there be such a good thing in the world? He stood up, bowed his hands to Prime Minister Wang, and said, "I just came to see Prime Minister Wang today. I hope Prime Minister Wang is fine. I will take my leave." Seeing Tang Ning leave decisively, Wang Xiang stood up, shook his head and said, "This little fox. Beijing is now a pool of muddy water, and the situation is changing day by day. He originally wanted to wait and see, but now it seems that he has to take a stand. A middle-aged man walked in from the outside. Seeing that Wang Xiang's expression was different, he asked doubtfully, "Dad, what did Tang Xiang tell you?" Wang Xiang did not answer, but said, "Go and invite Academician Zhang here, and tell him that I have important matters to discuss with him." Tang Ning came out of Prime Minister Wang's home with a smile on her face. These old foxes have been officials for many years and have worked hard in the court. They are well versed in the ways of being officials. Unless there is a stake in the situation, it is impossible for them to take sides before the situation becomes clear. But the kings and appearances are different. King Duan or King Run comes to the throne. For the Wang family, it is a huge difference. Tang Ning believed that Wang Xiang would make the right choice. After leaving the Wang family, he went to various houses and walked around. The next step was to see if Zhao Man could contact Wei Jian and let him meet Emperor Chen. The news that Right Minister Tang Ning returned to Beijing soon spread throughout the capital. Everyone knew that the current Right Chancellor had a deep hatred for the declining Tang family, and naturally he and Prince Duan were in different camps. In the past few years, the Tang family has been completely defeated by him, but King Duan has survived the desperate situation and bucked the trend. It is obvious that there will be a big collision between King Duan and the Right Prime Minister. Right Chancellor Tang Ning is a miracle. In just a few years, he climbed to the supreme position and defeated all seemingly impossible opponents. So much so that the people and officials unanimously believed that they should fight against him in the capital. No one has a good ending. However, this time, no one thought that he could defeat King Duan. Today is different from the past. The reason why Tang Ning was invincible in the past was because the person standing behind him was His Majesty, and Prince Duan was His Majesty's chosen successor. One was a minister, and the other was his son, the next emperor of the Chen kingdom. There is no need to think too much about which side His Majesty will be on. Thinking back to half a year ago, King Huai had monopolized the power, and King Run gradually appeared in front of the stage. Everyone thought that the throne of His Majesty would fall on one of these two princes, but they did not expect that in just half a year, everything would turn around. King Duan, who was least favored, succeeded in having the last laugh. But I don't know how the Fang family will feel during this period after King Huai and King Run are behind them. Within Fang Mansion, brothers Fang Hong and Fang Zhe were playing chess. Fang Hong dropped a chess piece and said, "Master Tang is back." Fang Zhe nodded and said, "It's just the right time to come back." Fang Hong sighed and said, "I didn't expect that His Majesty's body would collapse at any time. If it takes another 5 years. If in another 5 years, King Run has fully grown up, Fang Hong is sure that His Majesty will not place all his hopes on King Duan." Unexpectedly, fate plays a trick on people, and His Majesty suddenly becomes seriously ill, disrupting all their plans. Fang Zhe looked calm and said, "It doesn't matter if we don't have 5 years. Fang Hong's thoughts tend to be conservative. If His Majesty can pass the throne to King Run, everyone will naturally be happy. If he persecutes His Majesty as a minister, it will conflict with his belief in loyalty to the emperor over the years. But he also knew that the Fang family should be the priority and the overall situation should be the priority. By then, he wouldn't be able to care about so much. If there were outsiders present at this moment, they would definitely be horrified when they heard what the Fang brothers said. Although their tone was calm, what they said was treasonous and ironic. Prince Huai's mansion. King Huai, who had lost his power, was sitting leisurely by the lake with a fishing rod in his hand. A servant stepped forward and whispered, "Your Highness, Prime Minister Tang has returned to the capital." I know, as if he was afraid of disturbing the fish in the lake, King Huai's voice was very soft. If you weren't paying attention, you wouldn't be able to hear what he said. After the servants retreated, King Huai continued fishing. After a while, Princess Hui came over, looked at the shaking fishing rod, and reminded, "Your Highness, a fish is hooked." King Hui turned around, smiled at her, and said, "Don't worry, let it struggle for a while. When it struggles until it has no strength left, it won't be too late to close the pole." Royal Palace, a certain palace in the harem. Concubine Tang Hui paced in the palace, with a look of impatience on her face. She had suffered too much at Tang Ning's hands. Ever since she found out that Tang Ning had returned to Beijing, she had been feeling anxious and uneasy. Tang Qi was sitting in the palace, looked up at her and said, "Now the overall situation has been decided. Even His Majesty has recognized Prince Duan. Tang Ning alone cannot cause any trouble. On the contrary, the more arrogant he is, the more His Majesty will not tolerate him. Except for special circumstances, foreign ministers were not allowed to enter the emperor's harem. Tang Qi is now just a commoner, but he can enter and leave the harem at will." From this, it can be seen that this huge harem has completely fallen into the control of concubine Tang Hui. "I still feel a little uneasy." Tang Huifei stopped and said, "If Ming'er doesn't become the prince, I won't be able to rest assured." Tang Qi stood up and asked, "What do you mean?" A stern look appeared on concubine Tang Hui's face, and she said, "It will be a long night and many dreams, so it is better to go and see His Majesty to see the late emperor as soon as possible. Your Majesty already has the intention of establishing a prince. If his health deteriorates again, he will have to consider issuing an edict." Tang Qi looked at concubine Tang Hui, nodded slightly, and said, "Okay." In another part of the palace, Wei Jian walked out of a certain palace, looked at the female officials guarding the palace, sighed leisurely, turned and left. Manager Wei. While walking through a long corridor somewhere, a faint voice suddenly came to his ears. He turned his head and looked at a certain pillar, and saw a figure walking out from behind the pillar and said in surprise, "Princess." Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 879. According to Tang Ning's original plan, when he went to Gizhu to look for Su Mei, Suruz Hong Ai, Tang Yao Yao and the others went to Chu. By the time he came back from Gizhu, they had already joined Li Tianlan. In this way, when he picks up Su Mei, returns to the capital, brings Zhao Man with him, and uses a little plan, he can escape from the Chen kingdom. From then on, there is no limit to the size of the world. However, plans often fail to keep up with changes. He did find Su Mei, but Zairu and the others were also stopped, and the situation in the capital was completely reversed. I can't tell whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, let's call it a bad thing. The original plan of these people was to wait until Zhao Yuan grew up in 3 to 5 years, and Emperor Chen would pass the throne to him. Now Emperor Chen is seriously ill and may die at any time, and the day Emperor Chen dies will be the time for the Fang family to take action. The sooner Chen Huang dies, the sooner Duan Wang dies. It was a good thing, but their plan was completely disrupted by Prince Duan, and the court was filled with smoke, which was also not the result Tang Ning wanted. However, no matter what decision he would make in the future, he still needed to meet with Chen Huang first. In addition, there was another issue that Tang Ning had to consider. He and Xiao Ru can leave, but his father-in-law is Jing Zaiyin. Do you want him to give up his hard-earned official career and wander around the world with them? This was obviously unrealistic. Tang Ning had not yet thought about telling her parents-in-law about this matter. "What's wrong?" Zhong Mingli saw what was on his mind and asked, "Are you worried about Prince Duan?" Tang Ning nodded and said, "Prince Duan has been recognized by His Majesty now. If he ascends to the throne, it will be difficult for his father-in-law, Jing Zaiyin. You don't have to take care of me." Zhong Mingli waved his hand and said, "I have been tired of being an official over the years. If His Majesty decides to pass the throne to King Duan, I will resign and retire to accompany Yuxian. Over the years, I have treated her too much." Tang Ning thought for a while and asked, what if King Run is the one who succeeds? Prince Run, Zhou Mingli thought for a while, then shook his head and said, even if I am not Prince Duan, I still have the intention of resigning. I want to see around with your mother-in-law. Staying in the capital is really meaningless. Since his father-in-law had already made plans, Tang Ning said nothing more. Watching him leave, Zhou Mingli stood up and walked towards the government office. There is always a big gap between ideals and reality. He once had a dream of becoming a prince and becoming a prime minister. This dream did not come true, but it did come true in his son-in-law. Now that he is nearly 40 years old, he has taken these things lightly, and is also a little tired of the complexity of this officialdom. Rather than spending his whole life fighting with people in the court, it is better to resign as soon as possible to make up for the negative impact on his wife due to official business these years of debt. Although he intends to resign, he is still Jing Zheyin, the parent official of the people of the capital, and he has never relaxed about matters in the Yamen. As soon as he arrived at the government office, a young yin brought over a stack of files and said, "Sir, these are the case files submitted by various county governments in Jingzhou Prefecture last month. Please review them and use your seal. For some serious cases involving Jingzhou Mansion, the local county government is not qualified to make the final decision. Generally, the county government makes a ruling, and the case is closed only after the government office has reviewed and stamped the seal of Jingzhou Yin." Zhou Mingli looked at each dossier carefully and made sure there were no problems before stamping it with a big seal. This case. He picked up a file and said, "Why are there so few files?" What he is holding is a file on a human life case. For a case like this, the review will be extremely strict, and the investigation by the local government will be very detailed. It is unlikely that the final file will only contain this small amount. Na Shayin said, "The ins and outs of this case and the cause and effect are very obvious and there are no doubts." Therefore, the local government closed the case quickly and did not accumulate many files. After Zhou Mingli looked at it carefully, he found that the case was indeed simple and the facts were clear at a glance, so he didn't ask any more questions, picked up the seal and stamped it. Jingzhou Shayin picked up the one with the seal and said, "I have taken it to the Ministry of Punishment for filing." Zhou Mingli nodded, thinking about when to resign, and did not notice that when Xiaoyin turned his head, a strange smile appeared on his face. After Tang Ning returned to Beijing, he was not in a hurry to go to Shangsha province to handle government affairs. Now, his mind was no longer in Shangsha province, not in the court, or even in Chen Kingdom. What he was thinking about was whether his family would go to Guizhou or the grassland after things here were over, or he could add another option to the Chu country. After thinking about it carefully, he first eliminated the option of Chu state. Although the Chu kingdom can be regarded as a retreat, it is still someone else's territory. Li Tianlan is just a princess, not a Khan, and not a saint. She cannot make the decision on Chu kingdom's affairs alone. Tang Ning no longer wanted to live this kind of life of being dependent on others. Compared with Chu state, Guizhou province or the grassland was obviously more suitable. Compared with the grassland, Guizhou province was under Su Mei's control and was safer. But if she didn't go to the grassland to keep the appointment, Tang Ning was worried that Wang Yanyan would lead 100,000 cavalry to rush over. Fortunately, there were still 2 years left in the 3-year appointment, so there was no need to rush. Tang Ning took Zhongyi and Su Ryu to have dinner with her mother-in-law today, and unexpectedly found that her father-in-law was also there. He is Jing Zheyin. He is busy with official duties and has many things to do every day. Not to mention lunch, dinner is often dealt with in the county office. How can he be at home at this time? Not only Tang Ning was curious, but even Chen Yuxian was also surprised. He looked at him and asked in confusion, "Why did you come back so early today? Is there nothing going on in the Yamen?" Zhou Mingli's face was a little gloomy, and he said, "Something happened." I don't need to go to the Yamen for the next few days. Chen Yuxian's expression tightened and asked, what happened? Zhou Mingli shook his head and said, there is a case, and there are some problems. After listening to Zhou Mingli, Tang Ning knew what happened. My father-in-law is Jing Zhaoyin. The county Yamen in the capital can handle small disputes on their own, but major cases must go through Jingzhou Yamen and need Jing Zhaoyin to review and seal. The problem this time was in a case in a county under the jurisdiction of Jingzhou Prefecture. This case, which had complete human and material evidence and had been concluded by the local county Yamen, and the murder case that had been reviewed by Jingzhou Yamen, suddenly underwent unexpected changes. The criminal who was identified as the murderer became the victim, and the identity of the deceased was a local bully. When he was bullying the victim, he suddenly suffered from hysteria and died on the spot. The deceased's ancestor was quite powerful in the local area. After some operations, the local county government reversed black and white, identified the original victim as the criminal, and fabricated human and material evidence, and soon made it an ironclad case. Seeing that there was no doubt about the case, the Jingzhou government stamped the seal and transferred it to the Ministry of Justice for handling. If it were an ordinary case, it would have ended here. But the victim's family was dissatisfied with the government's actions, and actually filed a lawsuit against several officials including the local county magistrate and Jing Zhaoyin to the Dali Temple. This case involved Jing Zhaoyin, and the Dali Temple reported the case to the Shangsha province. The Shangsha province quickly made a decision and immediately suspended Jing Zhaoyin Zhou Mingli for investigation. As for those local officials, they were also controlled at the first time. This case seems reasonable, but it is full of doubts. The Dali Temple is different from the Jingzhou Prefecture. The Dali Temple only handles cases entrusted by His Majesty and does not accept civil lawsuits. Let's not talk about how that person came to the Dali Temple. The Shangsha province's handling of this case is also abnormal. Jingzhou Prefecture Yin is a fourth-rank official. Even if he failed in his duties, the main responsibility is not on him. How could the Shangsha province make a decision to suspend him for investigation? Obviously, this is a trap for his father-in-law, or a trap for him. At the Prince Duan's mansion, Prince Duan showed a sarcastic look on his face and sneered, I want to see whether you will help me or not. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 880. Zhou Mingli looked at Tang Ning and asked, you said this is a trap. Tang Ning nodded and said, this case seems reasonable, but it is full of doubts. There may be nothing wrong with the case itself, but some people deliberately did it in order to drag you into the water. If I am not mistaken, this is just the beginning. Zhou Mingli's face showed a trace of regret, and then he said, I was confused by the fake files made by the local authorities and did not conduct an in-depth investigation. It was my dereliction of duty, but suspension is already the most severe punishment. What else can they do? As soon as the voice fell, Peng Chen walked in from outside with a gloomy face and said, Sir, it's not good. The people in Beijing are saying that you colluded with local bullies, accepted their bribes, and took people's lives lightly, turning black and white upside down. The people are going to write a joint letter to punish you. Zhou Mingli heard the words, his body shook, and he slowly sat on the chair, his face extremely pale. If Jing Zhaoyin made a wrong judgment on a case, it was just a minor dereliction of duty for him, but because of this case, it could cause a civil uprising, which could be a big or small punishment, ranging from a salary fine to losing his job. The specific judgment depends on the mood of His Majesty. Now that His Majesty is seriously ill, it depends on the decision of the Shangsha province. Obviously, if this matter is a trap set by some people, their purpose is self-evident. After a long time, he sighed dejectedly and said, "Forget it, I've been tired of being Jing Zhaoyan for a long time." He looked at Chen Yuxian, forced a smile on his face, and said, "I will resign now and accompany you more in the future." Although Chen Yuxian hoped that her husband could always be with her, she also knew that this was just a helpless move and not what he wanted. He looked at Tang Ning and asked, "Ning you?" "No." Zhou Mingli knew what she wanted to say, stood up suddenly, and said, "A mere Jing Zhaoyan is not taken seriously by Prince Duan. He did this to find Ning's handle. If he intervenes, wouldn't it be exactly what Prince Duan wants?" Chen Yuxian's lips moved, but he didn't say anything in the end. Tang Ning smiled and said, "It doesn't matter. Prince Duan will not be the master of the capital now, and it won't be in the future." Zhou Mingli was stunned when he heard this, and then he seemed to realize something. He looked at Tang Ning in astonishment and asked, Are you? Before he could wait for Tang Ning's answer, a servant came forward to report that Fang Jie, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue, was visiting. Tang Ning looked at Zhou Mingli and said, "I'll go see Lord Fang." Zhou Mingli nodded, and after Tang Ning left, his expression gradually became complicated. Chen Yuxian noticed the change in his expression and asked in surprise, "What's wrong with you?" Zhou Mingli sighed and said, "This court is already the world of these young people. We are really old." In the front yard of the Tang mansion, Fang Xinyu pouted and looked at Tang Ning, saying dissatisfiedly, "Brother Tang Ning, why didn't you tell me when you came back?" Fang Jie gently touched her head and said, "Go and play. Daddy and Lord Tang have something to say." Fang Xinyu looked at him with a slightly complaining look and ran to the inner courtyard to find Xiao Xiao. Fang Jie looked at Tang Ning and said, "After Prince Duan came to power, he quickly replaced the Dali Temple. The new Dali Temple is his man. Su Shaiyin of Jingzhou Prefecture also surrendered to Prince Duan. Not only that, the magistrate of Wanyan County is also Prince Duan's man. If these people are Prince Duan's men, then this time the incident against my father-in-law will be easily linked. The case that Jingzhou Prefecture misjudged happened in Wanyan County. Prince Duan's people deliberately created this wrong case. Although they lost a county magistrate, they also dragged Jing Zhaoyan into the water. This deal is not bad. The Dali Temple minister is his people, which is why they did not choose to appeal to the Ministry of Justice but to the Dali Temple. Now that Emperor Chen is seriously ill, the Dali Temple is in charge of Prince Duan, and it is natural for them to say right and wrong. In addition, he incited the people and made this matter a big deal, so that if Tang Ning intervened, he would immediately fall into the quagmire, and if he did not intervene, his father-in-law's official position would most likely be lost. Intervention is troublesome, and if he does not intervene, his father-in-law's official position will be lost, and the face of the right prime minister will also be lost. This is a dilemma for Tang Ning. It must be said that Prince Duan played it beautifully this time. Tang Ning has not had such an opponent for a long time. Fang Jie paused, looked at Tang Ning, and said again, "Not only that, there is news from the palace that His Majesty will soon appoint Prince Duan as the crown prince, and an edict will be issued within this month. The matter of Jing Zhaoyan is related to Tang Ning. The matter of Emperor Chen appointing Prince Duan as the crown prince is something that the Fang family has to consider." Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "What do you think?" Fang Jie said calmly, "The Ministry of Revenue, the Ministry of Personnel and the Ministry of Rights, the Fang family can control it. Although Fang Jie is only the minister of the Ministry of Revenue, he obviously has control over the entire Ministry of Revenue. Needless to say, the Ministry of Personnel has no problem with Fang Hong. The Minister of Rights is the son of Zhang Dixioshi and the father of Zhao Yuan's sister. It seems that the Fang family has completely connected with this line." The meaning of Fang Jie's words is very clear. With the power that the Fang family directly or indirectly controls now, they can already influence or change Emperor Chen's decision. They could lie dormant and wait before, but since Emperor Chen wants to appoint Prince Duan as the crown prince, they can no longer wait. Tang Ning nodded and said, I will go to Lord Song in the Ministry of Justice. The Lu family in the Ministry of War does not need to worry. Lord Zhonghao is in the Ministry of Works. As for the Ministry of Shangshu, Prime Minister Wang will not sit idly by. As for the Xiao family and the Ling family, you do not need to worry about it. Fang Zhe bowed and said, please trouble Lord Tang. Tang Ning waved and said, helping you is helping me. Ministerial Office. Li Qi, the left chancellor of the Shangshu, held a file in his hand, looked at the people around him, and said, this case has a great impact and has even aroused public anger. It must be dealt with seriously. None of the people involved in the case can be tolerated. Lord Li, this is not appropriate. An official looked embarrassed and said, although Jing Zhaoyan was at fault in this case, it was obviously not the main fault. It seems a bit too much to dismiss Lord Zhone from his post and investigate. Fault, Li Qi snorted coldly and said, take human life lightly and arouse public anger. Angry, is this a minor fault? What is the capital? It is under the emperor's feet. As Jing Zhaoyan, he took human lives lightly and handled the case in a muddle-headed manner. He has failed the trust of His Majesty and the court. What qualifications does he have to sit in this position? The official reminded, don't forget, sir, he is the father-in-law of Tang Xiang. When mentioning that person, Li Qi felt a little timid, but when he thought that he had the support of His Royal Highness Duan Wang behind him, and this matter was originally a trap set by Duan Wang for Tang Ning, waiting for him to get into it, he felt a little more confident. It would be better if Tang Ning didn't intervene. Once he intervened, all the spearheads would be directed at him from Jing Zhaoyan, which was exactly what His Royal Highness Duan Wang wanted. The powerful and the nobles who break the law are guilty of the same crime as the common people. This is what Tang Xiang originally proposed. He slapped the table and said angrily, what's wrong with Tang Xiang's father-in-law? Not to mention Tang Xiang's father-in-law, even if Tang Xiang committed a crime, he should also be punished. He said it with great righteousness, spit flying, and looked selfless. The officials of the Shangshu province did not dare to say anything. During the days when the two prime ministers were away, he was the only person in charge of the Shangshu province. Even the Shangshu Yoshan was squeezed into a corner by him. He could not even see a memorial. Who else could disobey his orders? Just then, a voice came from behind. The Dali Temple only handles cases entrusted by His Majesty. It is not in compliance with the rules to exceed the authority to handle this case. Immediately order the Dali Temple to hand over the case to the Ministry of Justice for handling. The voice was not loud, but it was full of command. When the Shangshu Zhuokan heard this, his face sank. He was about to question, but when he saw the person coming, his face suddenly changed and blurted out, Prime Minister Wang. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 881. Remember 3Q Chinese website in 1 second, read wonderful novels for free without pop-ups. Prime Minister Wang. Hello, Prime Minister Wang. Seeing Prime Minister Wang appear, the officials of the Shangshu province stood up and saluted. Their faces were full of confusion and shock. There were rumors that Prime Minister Wang was seriously ill at home and didn't have many days left to live, but looking at him, he was obviously in good health. Upon hearing this, the Shangshu Zhuokan's face changed drastically, and he immediately said, Prime Minister Wang, this. Prime Minister Wang glanced at him and asked, why, this Shangshu province, my words are no longer valid. The Shangshu Zhuokan's face changed again, and he immediately said, I dare not. Not to mention that what Prime Minister Wang said was in accordance with the law. Even if he really disregarded the law, he dared not say a word. No matter how powerful Prince Duan was, Prime Minister Wang was the only one in power in the Shangshu province. He had served as prime minister for many years. In terms of prestige and influence in the court, even the right prime minister Tang Ning could not compare with him. After Shangshu Zhuoken returned to his position, he hurriedly left the Shangshu province on the pretext of an excuse. Wang Xiang returned to the Shangshu province, and the first thing he did was to stand up for Tang Ning, which means that the left and right ministers may have stood together. This matter is of great importance, and he must inform Prince Duan as soon as possible. Wang Xiang's return to the Shangshu province is the biggest thing that has happened in the Shangshu province in recent times. His appearance not only shattered the rumors about his serious illness, but also intervened in the affairs of Tang Ning and Prince Duan as soon as he arrived at the Shangshu Yamen, which directly showed his position. The left and right ministers joined forces and stood on the opposite side of Prince Duan. Such news was enough to shock the court and the public. Just when the officials of the Shangshu province had their own speculations in their hearts, Tang Ning also came to the Shangshu province in advance. He originally planned to rest at home for a while, but who would have thought that Prince Duan was so impatient, so he had to go back to the Yamen to deal with these things. As soon as he arrived at the Shangshu province, Tang Ning learned from Han Yuxian that Wang Xiang, who had been sick for many days, had just returned to the Shangshu province and transferred the case of Jing Zhaoyan's misjudgment from the Dali Temple to the Ministry of Justice. The Dali Temple was the man of Prince Duan, but the Ministry of Justice was ruled by Song Yi. There was no need for the Ministry of Justice to be partial. As long as the laws of the state of Chen were followed, his father-in-law would at most be fined a few months' salary. Tang Ning walked to the Shangshu room, where Wang Xiang was sitting, flipping through a memorial. He looked up at Tang Ning and said, "It's not easy for you to do anything about this matter, so I have to step up." Tang Ning bowed to him to show his gratitude. Wang Xiang shook his head and asked, "Do you know why I didn't want to intervene in the affairs of Prince Run before?" Tang Ning said, "Because of your majesty." "It's best if you can understand me." Wang Xiang nodded and said, "Your majesty wouldn't think anything of the Fang family alone. If you, me, and the Zhang family were added, your majesty would be vigilant. At that time, it would backfire." He paused and said, "But now it's different. Your majesty insists on choosing Prince Duan. It's a disaster for the court and the world. I have to stand up." Tang Ning thought for a while and asked, "What if your majesty insists on making Prince Duan the crown prince?" Wang Xiang sighed and said, "As a minister, if your majesty is wrong, I must dare to point out your majesty's mistakes." The old fox Wang Xiang was finally willing to stand up. Whether he was advising or forcing, as long as he stood up, the pressure on Tang Ning would be much less. At the same time, in the Prince Duan's mansion, the news that Wang Xiang had returned to the ministry of Shangshu had just been learned from the minister of the left. The Prince Duan was shocked and could not understand. "What did you say? Isn't that old man dying? Why did he return to the ministry of Shangshu?" The minister of the left looked bitter and said, "Your Highness, the rumors outside may be false. I saw with my own eyes that Wang Xiang's face was ruddy and his steps were steady. He didn't look sick at all. This old man dared to ruin my business." The Prince Duan's face was gloomy and he gritted his teeth and said, "Is he also colluding with the surname Tang?" Tang Ning alone was a bit too much for him to handle, and with Wang Xiang, these two people joined hands, but they represented most of the court. No matter how conceited he was, he knew that with his current strength, he could not defeat Wang Xiang and Tang Ning together. Shangshu Zhuoken said, "It doesn't matter whether they collude or not. What's important is that the case of Jing Zhaoyan's dereliction of duty has been handed over to the Ministry of Justice, and we can no longer interfere." "Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Justice." Prince Duan said coldly, "Song Yi has always refused to submit to me. When I become emperor, his career as a minister will also be over." Shangshu Zhuoken looked at Prince Duan and asked, "Your Highness, what should we do now?" "What else can we do?" Prince Duan waved his hand and said, "That old guy is not easy to mess with. I don't want to confront him at this time. However, he won't be proud for long. I will settle accounts with him in 2 months. Obviously, Prince Duan didn't want to confront Wang Xiang head-on. Judging from the current situation, it is irrational to offend Wang Xiang. Shang Shizuokan came out of Prince Duan's mansion and gave up some thoughts. He returned to the ministry of Shangshu. When he stepped into the government office and saw a young figure in the hall, his heart skipped a beat, but he quickly calmed down, forced a smile, greeted Prime Minister Tang, and sat back in his seat. When the two prime ministers were away, he had the final say in the Shangshu province. Now that the two prime ministers were back, Prince Duan did not dare to act rashly, so he naturally had to keep his head down and behave himself. It's just that he is still a little uneasy in his heart. Right, Prime Minister Tang Ning was nicknamed Careful. This time he laid such a big trap for his father-in-law, Jing Zhaoyan Zongmingli. If he takes revenge, Zhou Cheng, a mere minister, it may not be able to withstand it. But if you think about it carefully, Prince Duan will be the crown prince in a few days. Although Tang Ning is the right minister, she doesn't dare to touch the crown prince's people. Shangshu Zhou Cheng was uneasy, and other officials in Shangshu province were also curious. The right minister almost suffered a loss under Shangshu Zhou Cheng this time. According to his character, he will definitely come back with revenge, but Li Qi's background is too strong. In a few days, King Duan is the prince. When the time comes, His Majesty will be seriously ill and the prince will be in charge of the affairs. How can King Duan, who has already moved into the East Palace, spare him? When everyone was curious about whether the Prime Minister would take revenge, they looked up and saw that Tang Ning was already walking towards Zhou Cheng, the minister. When Minister Zhou Cheng saw Tang Ning walking towards him, his heart skipped a beat. He forced a smile on his face and asked, "Does Mr. Tang have anything to do with your subordinate?" "It's not a big deal," Tang Ning smiled and said, "Li Zhuokan is a new face in Shangshu province, so it's natural to get to know him." Tang Ning looked at Li Qi and asked, "Li Zhuokan, are you hot?" Li Qi wiped the sweat from his forehead and said, "Xiaoguan is not heat resistant and sweats easily." "The summer in the capital is indeed very hot." Tang Ning looked at him and said, "If you have a chance, Mr. Li, you can go to the grassland for a walk. The summer there is very cool and the climate is extremely pleasant." After Tang Ning said this, she left with a smile. Li Qi was relieved, but at the same time he was very confused. Right, Minister Tang Ning came over specially. He couldn't be concerned about whether he was hot or not, right? He shook his head. Although he didn't know why Tang Ning said those words, it was obvious that he was afraid. Even if she had set a trap for Jing Zhaoyan, Tang Ning did not dare to do anything to him with Prince Duan standing behind him. After being completely relieved, Shangshu Zhuokan Li Qi had a peaceful sleep. When he came to Shangshu province the next day, he unexpectedly found a few strange faces in Shangshu's room. Those people were very strong and looked a little savage, as if they were talking to Wang Xiang. Li Qi was surprised and asked a colleague, "Who are these people?" The official looked over and said, "Oh, those are the envoys from the grassland. The king summoned them to discuss something." Li Qi asked in surprise, "What can Prime Minister Wang and those barbarians have to discuss?" The official said, "It seems that the imperial court is sending a few envoys to the grassland. In order to show that we attach great importance to the grassland, the Shangshu province will also send some people there.